They tell you your life flashes before your eyes right before you die. For me, that wasn't it at all. I died on a Tuesday just west of Cheyenne on I-80. One minute I was there, the next I was gone. The doctors had a name for it. The paramedics had a procedure. But what I experienced, they don't have words for that. The rain was coming down sideways that night, hypnotic. The wipers on my Peterbilt were fighting a losing battle, smearing the neon glow of the highway signs across the glass. I'd been pushing for 14 hours straight, running on fumes and bitter truck stop coffee. My hands, calloused and thick from 40 years of gripping that wheel, felt like they were part of the truck itself. I remember catching my reflection in the side mirror. Just an old man with eyes as worn out as the tires on his rig. Back then I didn't have much time for God. My church was that cab. My choir was the hum of the diesel engine. My only prayer was that I'd make it to the next town before I ran out of fuel or time. I'd see other guys with crosses hanging from their mirrors or a Bible on the dash. I used the one my mama gave me as a coaster. I figured heaven and hell were things you made for yourself, right here on this earth. And I was living in a world of my own making. I don't remember seeing the other truck, just a sudden blinding glare of headlights in my lane. There wasn't even time to swear. There was just the scream of tires on wet pavement, a sound that rips right through you. My world became a violent explosion of shattering glass and the gut-wrenching groan of twisting steel. The last thing I felt was the crushing weight of my own engine and the steering column breaking against my chest. Then there was only blackness, and a silence so deep, so complete, it was louder than the crash itself. The pain was gone. The rain was gone. The truck was gone. I was gone. But that's the funny thing about being gone. It's not always the end of the road. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a whole new journey. And what happened in that silence, in that darkness, well, it changed everything. What do you think happens when everything just stops? If my story means something to you, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what I came back to tell you. Before that crash, before the silence, my life was anything but quiet. On the outside, I was Big John, king of the interstate, a man whose world was 18 wheels and a horizon that never ended. My cab was my castle, filled with the smell of stale coffee, diesel, and the cheap cigars I used to chew on. I had a reputation from coast to coast. If you needed a load moved fast, no questions asked, you called me. I was reliable, I was tough. I was a ghost who lived on the blacktop. My days were all the same, just with different city names on the signs. Wake up in a cheap motel or the sleeper cab, the vinyl cool against my skin, the first stop was always a diner. I knew the best ones in 30 states. I'd sit at the counter, flirt with a waitress named Brenda or Sue and order the same thing. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, and a side of bacon, extra crispy. I'd swap stories with other drivers, laugh too loud, and slap a few bucks on the counter. From the outside, I probably looked like the freest man alive. But that was just the show. The truth was I was running. I was running from the silence. The minute the engine cut off, the quiet would start to creep in, and with it, the ghosts. The ghost of my wife, Sarah, who told me she couldn't be married to a man who was never home. Not really. Even when he was sitting right next to her. Her face when she left, I can still see it. A mixture of pity and relief. That was the first revelation I never told a soul. The king of the road had been kicked out of his own home. And then there was my son, Mikey. I carried a picture of him in my wallet. Faded and creased from years of being pulled out in lonely truck stops. In the photo, he's 5, missing a front tooth, holding up a Little League trophy. He's 30 now. Haven't spoken to him in a decade. I sent a check for his wedding, but I couldn't bring myself to go. What would I have said? How could I explain that the road had a hold on me that was stronger than blood? That was the real weight I was hauling, heavier than any cargo. The weight of being a failure as a husband and a father. So I filled that hollowness with noise. The roar of the engine. The crackle of the CB radio. The jukebox in a roadside bar. I drank too much whiskey and gambled away my paychecks on poker games in dusty back rooms. I laughed the loudest because I was the emptiest. And God? I figured if he was real, he'd turned his back on me a long time ago, so I turned my back on him too. That Bible my mama gave me wasn't a source of comfort. It was a coaster for my coffee mug. A bitter reminder of a faith I thought was for weaker men. I was on a collision course long before I saw those headlights. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly understand, was that someone was still riding shotgun with me. Every single mile. If you've ever felt like you were running from something, what was it? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. The next part of my story is where the road I was on disappears completely. Looking back, the signs were all there. They were like little road flares on the shoulder of my life, and I just blew right past them, foot heavy on the gas. The universe, or maybe God himself, was trying to get my attention, but I was too stubborn to listen. It started about a week before the crash, in a greasy spoon diner just outside of Omaha. I was on my third cup of coffee when this old man sat down in the booth across from me. He had eyes that looked like they'd seen the beginning and the end of time. He just stared at me for a minute, then slid a little paper tract across the table. I was about to brush it off, but he spoke, and his voice was quiet, but it cut right through the clatter of the diner. He said, "The road you're on, son, it ends sooner than you think. Make sure you know where you're going." I just grunted, used the tract to wipe up a coffee ring, and left. But his words, they stuck to me like tar. But what happened a few nights later was even stranger. I was asleep in my cab, parked at a rest stop in Wyoming. The silence of the high desert usually put me right out, but that night I had a dream. I wasn't driving my truck. I was watching it from above like a hawk circling in the sky. I saw it barreling down a dark, rain-slicked highway, and I could see myself inside, my face pale and tired in the dashboard lights. Then from the other direction came this single piercing headlight. It grew brighter and brighter until it filled the whole dream with white light. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. It felt so real. I shook it off as just a bad dream, a side effect of too much caffeine and not enough sleep. The day of the crash, everything felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick, like it was holding its breath. I got a call from dispatch, a guy named Sal, pushing me to make up time. "You're burning daylight, John," he barked into the phone. I felt this pressure in my chest, a knot of pure dread. The sky turned the color of a bruise. When the first drops of rain hit my windshield, they were big and heavy like pebbles. The CB radio, my constant companion, was acting up. It wasn't just static. In between the chatter from other drivers, I could swear I heard a whisper. Single word repeating over and over. "Stop, stop, stop." I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. I told myself it was just the storm, the wires crossing, my mind playing tricks on me. I was Big John. I didn't stop for bad weather or bad feelings. I had a deadline, that was my God. The schedule, the paycheck. But as the rain turned into a downpour and the road became a slick black mirror, that whisper in the static got louder. That old man's face flashed in my mind. The dream of the single headlight played behind my eyes. Every instinct, every nerve in my body was screaming at me to pull over, to just stop. I ignored it all. That was my final, fatal mistake. I was pushing toward a destination, but I had no idea I was already at the end of my road. Have you ever had a gut feeling so strong that it felt like a warning from another world? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear what was on the other side of that blinding light, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell. You're not going to believe the orders I was given. The roar of the engine was my only answer to the whispers and the static. I pushed the throttle down, trying to outrun the feeling in my gut, trying to outrun the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets now, so thick it felt like driving at the bottom of a lake. The world outside my windshield was just a smear of red and white lights, a watercolor painting of a nightmare. My whole body was a single clenched fist. Saw the mile marker for Cheyenne flash past, a ghost in the storm. Almost there. Just a few more miles. That's when I saw it. Not two headlights like I dreamed. Just one. A single, blinding eye of light, dead center in my lane. It wasn't moving. It was just there. A wall of light waiting for me. Time seemed to stretch and warp like old cassette tape. There was no room to swerve, no time to brake. My foot was frozen on the accelerator. In that last fraction of a second, my life didn't flash before my eyes. Only one face appeared in my mind. Mikey, my son. Not the grown man I hadn't spoken to in a decade, but the little boy in the faded picture in my wallet, smiling with a missing tooth. My last thought wasn't a prayer. It was just his name. Mikey. The impact wasn't a sound. It was a physical force that unmade the world. It was a white-hot flash of pain that vaporized every other thought, every other feeling. I felt the steering column shatter my ribs like a bundle of dry sticks. I felt the crushing, impossible weight of the engine folding my cab around me like a tin can. The shriek of metal was the last sound of my world, a final, agonizing scream. And then nothing. The pain vanished. The noise was gone. The light was gone. There was only a profound, absolute silence. A blackness so complete it felt solid, like I was wrapped in velvet. I wasn't falling, I wasn't floating, I just was. The fear was gone. The regret was gone. Big John, the trucker, the sinner, the runaway father, he was gone. But I was still here. Something was... Slowly, like my eyes adjusting to the dark, a picture started to form. But I wasn't looking out through my own eyes. I was somewhere else. Above. I was looking down at the wreckage on I-80. I saw my Peterbilt, twisted into a grotesque sculpture of steel and shattered glass. I saw the other truck, its front end buried in mine. I saw the rain still falling, washing over the scene, making the flashing lights of the first responders dance and glitter on the wet asphalt. And I saw them, the paramedics, working with the jaws of life on the driver's side door. They were trying to get to a body. My body. I could see my own hand, limp and pale, dangling from the shattered window, but I felt nothing. No connection. No panic. Just a strange, quiet detachment, like watching a movie about someone else's tragedy. And for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't running anymore. What do you think is the first thing you'd feel if you saw yourself from the outside like that? Let me know your thoughts below. If you want to know what was waiting for me in that silence, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The journey was just beginning. Watching them work on my body, it was like watching a mechanic trying to fix a totaled truck. There was a sense of urgency down there, of panic. But up here where I was, there was none of that. The cold rain that was soaking the paramedics didn't touch me. The smell of gasoline and hot metal didn't reach me. It was the strangest feeling in the world. All the pain, the fear, the bone-deep weariness that had been my constant companions for 40 years, they were all trapped down there, in that broken shell of a man pinned behind the wheel. Then I felt a gentle pull. It wasn't a force, not really. It was more like an invitation. The scene below, the flashing red and blue lights, the twisted metal, it all started to get quiet. The wail of the sirens began to fade, not like they were driving away, but like someone was slowly turning down the volume on the world. The image of the crash started to blur, the sharp edges softening, like a photograph left out in the sun. I wasn't scared. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly safe. The blackness returned, but it was different this time. It wasn't empty. It was full of a peace so profound it was a physical sensation. It wrapped around me like a warm blanket on the coldest Wyoming night. I had no body, no hands, no eyes, but I could feel. I could perceive. And what I perceived was the weightlessness of being free. All the junk I'd carried around for decades, the guilt over my son, the bitterness toward my ex-wife, the anger at God, it was all gone. It had been part of the cargo, and the truck had been wrecked. I was just me. The real me, underneath all the grime and the grief. That was the first shock. Realizing how heavy my life had been, and that I wasn't carrying it anymore. But what happened next was even more profound. In the center of that peaceful velvet darkness, a point of warmth began to grow. It wasn't a light I could see with my eyes, but one I could feel with my soul. It started as a tiny ember, then grew steadily, pushing the darkness away. It didn't burn, it soothed, and with it came a sound. Not a sound for ears, but a vibration that resonated in the very core of my being. It was a low, beautiful hum, like a choir of a million voices, all singing a single perfect note of pure love. I'd spent my entire life running from silence, filling my ears with noise. But this was the sound I had been searching for all along. I didn't know where I was going. I had no map for this road. But I knew with a certainty that went beyond thought that I was finally heading home. Have you ever felt a peace so complete that it felt like it wasn't from this world? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see who was waiting for me inside that light, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. The next part of my story is the reason I came back. The warmth grew, pushing back the velvet blackness. It wasn't like a fire, it was like the feeling of the sun on your face after a long, cold winter. It was a light that you didn't see with your eyes, you felt it in your soul. It filled every empty space inside me, all the hollowed-out places where regret and loneliness had lived for so long. The hum I'd heard before grew into a symphony, a sound of pure, unconditional love that vibrated through the very essence of who I was. I was being drawn toward the heart of it all, pulled gently into an ocean of pure, brilliant light. And in the center of that light was a presence. There was no face like you'd see on a painting, no long white robe or sandals. To describe it with words is like trying to describe the sun to a man born blind. He was made of the light itself, of a love so powerful and so personal it brought my soul to its knees. I didn't have to be told who it was. In a way I can't explain, I had always known him. It was Jesus. And the moment I recognized him, a lifetime of my own life flooded my senses. But it wasn't a judgment. That was the most shocking revelation of all. I saw myself as a little boy crying over a busted-up knee after falling off my bike, and I felt a hand of pure warmth on my back, a comfort I'd forgotten. I saw myself years later, sitting alone in a smoky bar after Sarah left me, staring into a whiskey glass with dead eyes. And I saw him, his presence of light, sitting on the stool right next to me, his compassion a silent shield against my despair. I saw myself in the cab of my truck, 1,000 miles from anyone who cared, a single tear cutting a track through the grime on my cheek. And I felt his presence there too, a hand of light resting on my shoulder. He showed me every dark and lonely moment of my life, not to shame me, but to show me the one stunning truth. I had never, not for one single mile, been alone. A thought, not my own, but clearer than any spoken word, filled me. I was there, John. Every mile, every hidden tear, every lonely night. I never left your side. The shame was overwhelming. My own voice, a thought from my soul, cried out, I don't deserve this. I used your mother's Bible as a coaster. I cursed your name. I denied you. The feeling of love that came back was so immense it felt like it could hold the entire universe. My love isn't about deserving, my son. It's about grace. And I have always loved you. In that instant, 40 years of calloused anger, of bitter pride, of bone-deep sin, it was all washed away. I was clean. I was home. All I wanted was to stay in that light and that love forever. It was a peace that this world could never offer. It was the end of the road I'd been searching for my whole life. But what he said next shattered that peace and gave me a purpose I never could have imagined. An understanding flowed from him to me, a new set of orders. Your run on earth isn't over. Go back, John, go back and be my witness. Tell them I am real. I felt a protest rise up in me. They won't believe me. They'll think I'm crazy. The answer was immediate, a wave of strength and certainty that flowed right into me. You will not speak with your strength, but with mine. Now go. I am with you. And with that final thought, the ocean of light surged, and I felt a jolt so powerful it was like being hit by lightning and born all at the same time. What would you do if you were given a direct order to go back, even if it meant leaving paradise behind? Let me know in the comments. And please subscribe and ring that bell because you need to hear about the man I became when I woke up. I wanted to stay. I mean, who wouldn't? All the pain, the dirt, the loneliness of my life had been washed away. I was home. I was finally at peace, floating in an ocean of pure love, and I never wanted to leave. I was ready to just let go, to become part of that light forever. It was the end of the line, the final destination. And it was more beautiful than any sunrise I'd ever seen over the Rockies. I had run my last mile. But then, a thought, a command, came from the heart of that light. It wasn't spoken in words, but I understood it clearer than any voice over a CB radio. This isn't the end of your run, John. It's just a stopover. A feeling of confusion washed over me. A stopover? I was dead. I saw my own body, I saw the wreck, what else was there? The answer came not as a suggestion, but as an order filled with a love so profound it was impossible to disobey. There are so many others out there on that blacktop, men just like you. Their hearts are as hard as the road they drive on, and they think they're all alone. They need to know I'm real. That this place is real. Go back, John, go back and be my witness. Tell them I am waiting for every single one of them with open arms. My soul cried out in protest. A lifetime of being laughed at, of being the tough guy, rose up in me. But they won't believe me, I thought. They'll laugh me out of every truck stop from here to California. I'm Big John, the sinner, the drinker. They'll say the crash knocked my brains loose. This was the second shocking revelation. I was being sent back, but not as the man I was. I was being sent back as a messenger. The reply was instant, and it wasn't a scolding. It was a wave of pure strength that flowed right into the core of my being, silencing all my fear. You will not speak with your strength, but with mine. Your life will be the proof. Now go. I am with you always. And with that, the light surged. It wasn't a gentle pull this time. It was a jolt, like a cosmic defibrillator shocking my soul. The peace shattered, the warmth vanished, and I was falling, tumbling back through that velvet darkness. It felt like being thrown off the highest mountain, a violent, gut-wrenching plunge back toward the world I'd just left behind. The last thing I remember was a sound like a clap of thunder right inside my head, and a pain so blinding it was like being set on fire. Then a new sound, a steady rhythmic beeping, quote, and the first thing I saw wasn't a beautiful light. It was a stained ceiling tile in a hospital room. I was back. If you were given a direct order from God to leave paradise and return to a life of pain to deliver a message, could you do it? Let me know what you think in the comments. And please subscribe and ring that bell because you need to hear about the man I became when I opened my eyes. It wasn't Big John anymore. The first sensation was pain, a white-hot, all-consuming fire that roared back to life in every nerve of my body. It was a brutal anchor, yanking my soul out of that ocean of light and slamming it back into a broken cage of flesh and bone. The peaceful hum of eternity was gone, replaced by a high-pitched, rhythmic beeping. It was the sound of a machine telling me I was alive, when every part of me was screaming that a terrible mistake had been made. I forced my eyelids open. They felt like they were sealed with lead. The first thing I saw wasn't light, but a cheap, water-stained ceiling tile. I smelled antiseptic and bleach, a sterile chemical smell that burned my nose. I tried to move my hand, and a jolt of agony shot up my arm, sharp as a knife. I looked down. My body was a roadmap of tubes and wires, my arm encased in a plaster cast, my chest wrapped so tight I could barely breathe. A young nurse was checking my forebag. When she turned and saw my eyes were open, she let out a gasp so sharp it startled us both. She fumbled for the call button, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Doctor, get in here. It's the man from the I-80 wreck. He's awake." The doctor, a man with tired eyes and a skeptical frown, spent the next hour talking at me, not to me. He used words like unprecedented recovery and medically inexplicable. He showed me charts with lines that went flat. He told me I'd been pronounced dead at the scene. He said I had no brain activity for 7 minutes. To him, I was a medical puzzle, a 1 in a billion anomaly that would probably get him published in a journal. He couldn't see the truth. He couldn't see that I wasn't a miracle of medicine. I was a delivery boy with a message, sent back to a body that was barely fit for the road. That was my new secret. They saw a patient who had survived. I knew I was a witness who had been revived. But the hardest part wasn't the pain or the confusion of the doctors. It was the quiet. In the middle of the night, when the beeping of the machines was the only sound, the memory of that peace, of that perfect love would come rushing back, and the contrast was devastating. I had been home, and now I was in exile. I had been weightless, and now I was trapped in a shattered body that felt more like a prison than a home. More than once I just closed my eyes and begged him to take me back, but there was only silence. The mission wasn't finished. A few days later, a visitor came. I was half asleep when I heard a nurse say his name. Mikey, my son. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. He stood in the doorway, a grown man now with lines of worry around his eyes that I had put there. His face was pale. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. I learned later they had called him to come identify my body. He came expecting a morgue, not a hospital room. He took a hesitant step inside, his hands shoved in his pockets. The old Big John would have turned away, grunted, or said something bitter to push him off. But the old Big John was dead and buried on that highway. I just looked at him, and for the first time in a decade, the wall I had built between us crumbled to dust. A tear rolled down my cheek. "Mikey," I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. "I'm so sorry." The look on his face, that was the third revelation. He wasn't looking at his runaway father. He was looking at a complete stranger. How do you even begin to explain to the people you hurt the most that you had to die to finally learn how to live? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to know what happened when I tried to tell my son the truth, please subscribe and ring that bell. The real journey was just getting started. Mikey just stood there in the doorway, a ghost from a life I didn't live anymore. The 10 years that separated us felt like a canyon. He looked at me lying in that hospital bed, and I could see the war in his eyes. He'd come to identify a body, not to have a reunion. He was bracing for grief, but what he got was confusion. My apology, those 2 simple words, just hung in the air between us, as strange and out of place as a hymn in a honky-tonk. He finally walked over to the bed, his movements stiff, cautious. He didn't sit. He just stood there, looking at the man who was his father, but wasn't. "The doctors said you were gone," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "They said it was a miracle." I tried to sit up, but a bolt of pain shot through my ribs. I fell back against the pillows, wincing. "It wasn't a miracle, son," I rasped. "It was an order." He just stared, his jaw tight. I could see him thinking it. The crash knocked him crazy. The old me would have gotten angry, defensive, but the old me was dead. All I felt was a deep, aching love for this boy, this man who I had failed so completely. "Mikey," I said, my voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve it, but can you just listen?" The weeks in that hospital were the longest of my life. The physical pain was one thing, but the spiritual ache was another. I was a man caught between 2 worlds. By day, doctors and nurses would poke and prod, talking about nerve regeneration and cognitive function tests. They saw a patient, a data point. But at night, in the quiet hum of the machines, I would close my eyes and I was back in that light, feeling that peace. And I would weep. Not from pain, but from homesickness for a place I'd only known for a few minutes. One day, a nurse brought in a box of my personal effects they'd recovered from the cab. Inside, amongst the melted dashboard junk and a half-chewed cigar, was my mama's Bible. The cover was warped from the rain, the pages stained with rings from 100 coffee cups. I held it in my hands, this book I had used as a coaster, and for the first time I opened it. The words weren't just ink on a page anymore, they were alive. They were the roadmap for the new run I was on. Leaving that hospital felt like being born again. The world looked different, the sky seemed bluer. The roar of a passing semi on the highway didn't sound like freedom anymore. It sounded like a cry of loneliness. My old life was a set of clothes that didn't fit. I sold the wreckage of my rig for scrap. I gave most of the money to Mikey's mother, Sarah, with a letter of apology that took me 3 days to write. Mikey drove me from the hospital. We didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't angry anymore. It was watchful. Before he dropped me at a small motel, I just looked at him. "I love you, son," I said. "I know I was a bad father." But the man who did that to you, he died on that highway. Mikey just nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and drove away. My new mission started where my old life had lived, a truck stop. The smell of diesel and fried food was the same, but I was different. I walked into the diner and saw a few familiar faces. A guy named Gus, who I'd played poker with a dozen times, slapped me on the back. "Big John. Heard you bought the farm. Good to see you ain't a ghost," he boomed. The whole table laughed. The old me would have laughed louder, ordered a round of whiskeys, and told a tall tale about the crash. Instead, I just smiled. "It's good to see you too, Gus," I said quietly. I ordered a coffee and sat with them. I didn't talk about myself. I just listened. I listened to them talk about their wives, their kids, their money troubles, their loneliness. I saw the same emptiness in their eyes that used to be in mine. I wasn't Big John, king of the interstate anymore. I was just John, a witness. And my testimony wasn't a sermon, it was my life. Do you believe a person can truly change overnight, or is it always a long, slow process? Let me know what you think in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell, because I'm going to share more stories about the men I've met on this new road, and the miracles I've seen that are even bigger than my own. It's funny, for 40 years my whole life was about the load. Get the cargo from point A to point B, don't be late. Don't ask questions. The heavier the load, the bigger the paycheck. I thought that's what made a man, the weight he could carry, but I was wrong. The most important thing I ever delivered wasn't in the back of my trailer. It was the message I brought back in my own broken body. I'm not a preacher. I don't have fancy words. I still drink my coffee black and I still smell like diesel half the time. But the emptiness is gone. That cold, hollow feeling that used to sit in the cab with me on those long, dark nights, it's been replaced by a warmth, a presence. The same one I felt in that brilliant light. My mama's old Bible isn't a coaster anymore. It's my new roadmap. And the destination it points to isn't a warehouse in some city, it's home. I learned that we're all on a road, whether you're behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler or a desk. We're all hauling something. Regret, fear, loneliness, anger. We think we have to carry it all by ourselves. But the biggest revelation, the one that changed everything for me, is that you don't. There's a hand reaching out, ready to take the wheel when you're too tired to steer, ready to help you carry that weight. You just have to be willing to pull over and let him in. My life isn't perfect now, but it's full. For the first time, I'm not running from the silence. I'm running toward the one who was waiting for me in it all along. So let me ask you this. What's the heaviest load you're carrying all by yourself right now? Let me know in the comments below. If my story meant something to you, please subscribe and ring that bell. I've met a lot of other folks out here on this new road, each with a story you won't believe, and I plan on sharing every single one of them.